I grew up in Charlottesville, and my dad and mom planted Jefferson Park Baptist Church back in 1963. My roots are in the church here in Charlottesville. Went to Lane High School, got a football scholarship to the University of Virginia. Somewhere around the age of 16, I decided that my parents' faith wasn't going to be my faith. So I sat down with my dad and very boldly said, you know, I don't think I'm going to go to church anymore. I don't think I'm going to kind of do this Christian thing anymore. And he said, well, as long as you're under my roof, you're going to go to church. You can pick which church you want to go to, but you're going to go to church. And so I went to church with a friend of mine for a couple years. As soon as I got to UVA, I stopped going to church and kind of went my own way and decided that I wasn't sure about this Christian thing. I certainly didn't want it to regulate my life any. And so somewhere my senior year, I think it was the 5th or 6th game of the season, playing football there, I thought, you know, maybe I'd have a shot at the pros. Pro scouts talking to me, etc. And I think it was the 6th game, it was against Virginia Tech of my senior year. I got my 9th concussion. And yeah, I know it shows. And so came in Saturday, came in to watch film. Coach pulled me aside and said, you're done. You don't play anymore. And my life fell apart at that point. Everything that I had pointed towards, my whole life was built around being a football star. And it was gone. In a matter of seconds, it was gone. I can remember getting in the car and driving out into the country out near Free Union and getting out of the car and screaming and crying and looking up in the sky and saying, how could you do this to me? And from that point on, it was kind of downhill trajectory. I started drinking a lot to the point where I actually had some gastrointestinal issues because of just drinking too much. I don't know how I graduated. I was able to stay in school. I was able to graduate. Got a job that next fall. I went up to work with Georgia Pacific in Manassas, Virginia, and there was a guy there, a salesman, who was also an ex-football player, went to Clarion State, and a wrestler. And he and I decided to start running together to try to stay in shape. And come to find out this guy's a Christian, really obnoxious Christian. And so he started talking theological. We'd have these theological debates while we were out on a run, and we'd kind of go after each other. I continued to drink a lot. And he would go with me to the bars. I just didn't realize he wasn't drinking at the same level I was, and would take me home and was very loving and patient with me. And my then girlfriend, now wife, moved up there the next year. She was befriended by this guy's wife, and so we spent a lot of time together as couples. One night Gary and I went out, and I got drunk, came back to his house. We were in his living room, and he just started sharing the gospel with me. And next thing I knew, I was down on all fours, weeping, asking the Lord to take my life. It was his. I had made a mess of it. Come to find out, and 2 or 3 days later, I was trying to get enough courage to tell my girlfriend that I'd become a Christian. Didn't know how she was going to respond, and come to find out that somewhere within that 24-hour span of time, she had come to the Lord as well. And so that was the beginning of a wonderful journey together with what is now my wife. And I think it was God's grace that happened to us within a 24-hour period. And so that's how I came to the Lord. Well, Sherry and I had kind of lived very secular lives. You can read into that what you want to. It's a dating couple. And after we became believers, this couple sat down with us and said, you know, your lives are different. You're disciples of Jesus Christ, and you need to start living that way. And so we decided that we were going to clean up our act and start living as disciples of Jesus Christ. it wasn't too soon after that I realized that this is the woman that God wanted me to marry. And so I asked her to marry me. We got married, it's probably about 18 months later. Well, worked at Georgia Pacific up in Manassas, worked up there for 2.5 years, got into their management program, and decided that I really didn't want to go into management in this Fortune 500 corporation. Was offered a job back in Charlottesville, and so Sherry and I moved back to Charlottesville, and I worked for a guy who owned a little office supply store here. In the midst of that, we got into a small group with some other couples our age, and they were really encouraging me to consider going to seminary. And I kind of start to feel this call to go to seminary. And then one day in the midst of my prayers, I felt like the Lord said, it's time for you to go to seminary. So I can remember distinctly coming home and telling Sherry, I believe God's calling us to seminary, and she says, I don't think so. We lived in this cute little house in downtown Charlottesville, and we kind of had the American dream, and we were pretty content. And I said, well, I'm not going until God confirms it in your mind and in your heart. And so probably about 8 months later, sure enough, she said, that's what we need to do. So we ended up, I applied to several different seminaries. We ended up going to Gordon Conwell Seminary outside of Boston. Specifically picked that seminary because it was non-denominational, and I really didn't know where I was going to fit into the scheme of things. I didn't even know if I was going to be a pastor when I went off to seminary. I just felt like that's what we should be doing. Well, at the end of 2 years of seminary, I ended up getting offered a job at the Stony Brook School in Long Island, which is a boarding school. I had no idea when I went off to seminary that I'd be end up going to a boarding school. I mean, Sherry and I were raised in a public school, and much less a boarding school. And so we went there. We were in a dorm with 55 boys from the 7th grade to the 12th grade with another couple. We were the dorm parents. Sherry taught French. I taught Bible. Was chaplain and coached football and track. And everything I learned in seminary obviously was good preparation for that. Not specifically, but just kind of giving me that foundation, that biblical foundation to be able to do. And I tell you, the hardest people to teach are teenagers when it comes to the Bible. And so I was thankful for my experience in seminary. I was at Stony Brook for 4 years. I'd heard about, through some friends, that they were starting this small school in Charlottesville. And I knew the guy who was the charter headmaster and the founding headmaster. And it sounded like things were going really well. He, I think it was at the end of 2 years, they got into some financial problems. The school did. And so they made a transition as far as the headmaster goes. And so they called me up and asked me if I was interested in the job. I said, I'm very content and happy where I'm at. And they said, well, just apply for the job, which I did. And I applied for the job, and I realized that I was one of the final 3 candidates. The other 2 had their PhDs, and here I am. Why would you ever hire this ex-jock? And in fact, I think that was the perception of some of the parents, to be honest. Got the job, ended up spending 9 years there. School really grew, it took off. God was very gracious. I think when I came in, we were 185, and when I left, we were 675. So the school kind of grew, and I had some wonderful teachers. That was a neat experience for me. At the end of that 9 years, I was about done with the headmastering thing, so I ended up going back to Stony Brook and was assistant headmaster there for 4 years. Right before I left to go back to Stony Brook, I think it was my 7th year at Covenant, Sherry and I had started coming to church here at Christ Community Church, and was befriended by the pastor, John Manzano. Became an elder in training during that time, right before we left to go back to New York. And then we stayed in correspondence with John while we were in New York. He was looking to hire an associate pastor, and so the conversation started, and at the end of 4 years, when we went back, we came here as associate pastor.
It's probably only been 6 months, but you just got back off a sabbatical, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was the one thing that God put on your heart?
The one thing God put on my heart,
One or two things. Big things.
to be still and rest in Him. And it sounds kind of ethereal way out there, but for the first time, I think in my whole life, I stopped long enough to take joy in His creation. Every morning I'd sit out on the sun porch down in Florida looking over this river, and with arms wafting onto the porch, and all kinds of birds and wildlife, and quiet. And I think for the first time in my life, I slowed down long enough to appreciate what my Creator's really done. I love to coach. I know it's not you can't find it in Galatians or Romans or anything. I feel like my gift is being a coach, is drawing people together with a focused, defined mission and vision, and enabling people to do that and go out and reach that mission and vision. I guess it would be almost apostolic. I think that's probably my greatest gift.